Your Eminences, religious leaders of our continent, brothers and sisters of Africa, I stand before you today not as a head of state who must measure every word for diplomatic consequence. I stand as a son of this soil, a child of Africa, a man who has witnessed both the healing power of faith and its distortion through the lens of power. Today I must speak directly about the relationship between the Vatican and Africa, not with bitterness, but with the clarity that only truth provides. Let me begin by acknowledging what many whisper but few proclaim. The Church in Africa is not the Church in Rome. Here, Christianity pulses with life. Our cathedrals may have fewer gold ornaments, but they overflow with voices that shake the walls. Our priests may lack political connections, but they walk miles to reach the sick. Our faithful do not attend Mass out of habit, but out of hunger, a spiritual hunger that persists despite material poverty. And yet, when Africa speaks of faith, the world listens only when we echo doctrines formed in foreign lands, in contexts far removed from the realities of our continent. I speak these words with respect for Pope Francis, who has shown more awareness than his predecessors of the economic injustices that plague our world. But respect does not require silence when fundamental truths must be addressed. Let us speak plainly. For centuries, the cross arrived on our shores alongside the sword. Missionaries built churches while traders built chains. We were taught to pray with eyes closed, and when we opened them, we had lost our lands, our resources, our very identities. This is not ancient history. It is living memory. Even today, the Church speaks loudly about individual morality, but whispers, or remains silent, when multinational corporations, many based in so-called Christian nations, extract our minerals while paying wages that cannot feed a family. The Vatican issues encyclicals about the dignity of human life, but rarely condemns the economic systems that make that dignity impossible for millions of Africans. When mining companies pollute the waters where our children bathe, where is Rome's moral outrage? When pharmaceutical companies test drugs on African populations they would never dare test in Europe, where is the papal condemnation? When foreign military bases occupy African soil under the pretext of fighting terrorism while securing access to resources, where are the bishops' protests? Brothers and sisters, I do not question the faith of African Catholics. Their devotion humbles me. Their resilience inspires me. What I question is a global church structure that still treats Africa as a mission territory rather than a source of theological wisdom and spiritual leadership. Consider this. Africa now has the fastest growing Catholic population in the world. Our seminaries are full while those in Europe stand empty. Our churches overflow while those in the West are sold and converted to apartments or museums. And yet, how many African cardinals help select the Pope? How many African theologians shape Vatican doctrine? How many African voices are truly heard in the corridors of religious power? The answer is too few, and those few are often selected because they represent the least challenge to established hierarchies. When I became president, many foreign observers claimed I was against religion. This is false. I am against religion that serves as an anesthetic, numbing people to injustice while promising rewards in heaven. I am against faith that teaches acceptance of poverty as spiritual virtue rather than as human failure. I am against theology that separates the soul from the body, the spiritual from the material, allowing exploitation to continue unchallenged. What I believe in, what Burkina Faso stands for, is a spirituality that liberates rather than sedates, a faith that empowers rather than subdues, a religious practice that honors our African identity rather than erasing it. This is why I now directly address Pope Francis and the Vatican leadership. Your Holiness, you sit on a throne built in part with gold from lands where children now die of hunger. You preside over an institution that still holds African artifacts and manuscripts taken during colonial conquest. You lead a global church that speaks of universal brotherhood while maintaining structures of power that reflect the same hierarchies established during an age of empire. These are uncomfortable truths, but they are truths nonetheless. If Rome truly wishes to be universal rather than merely Western, is the Catholic Church truly seeks to be Catholic, meaning universal rather than European, then fundamental changes must occur. First, the Vatican must acknowledge that true evangelization is not a one-way transmission of doctrine, but a dialogue where African spirituality has as much to teach Rome as Rome has to teach Africa. Our understanding of community, of the connection between the living and the ancestors, of the sacred nature of the earth, these are not pagan remnants to be purged, but spiritual insights to be honored. Second, the Church must move beyond charitable works, building schools and hospitals, feeding the hungry, to address the structural sins that create hunger in the first place. This means using its considerable moral authority to condemn unjust economic arrangements, exploitative resource contracts, and the debt systems that keep our nations in perpetual poverty. Third, the Vatican must recognize that its silence on geopolitical matters is not neutrality, it is complicity. When foreign powers initiate coups against African leaders who challenge their interests, when they assassinate those who seek true independence, when they impose sanctions that harm ordinary citizens, and the Church says nothing, it betrays the gospel it claims to uphold. Fourth, the leadership of the global Church must reflect the demographic reality of the faithful. It is time for African cardinals not just to participate in Vatican councils, but to lead them. It is time for African theological perspectives to shape doctrine, not merely apply doctrines developed in contexts far removed from our realities. Finally, the Vatican must engage in a honest process of restitution, returning not only artifacts and artworks taken during colonial conquest, but also lands acquired through dubious means, and investing Church resources in healing the wounds of a continent still bleeding from centuries of exploitation blessed by religious authorities. Brothers and sisters, I speak these truths not to divide but to heal, not to reject Christianity, but to call it back to its revolutionary origins, to the Christ who stood with the marginalized, who challenged the powerful, who overturned the tables of those who used religion for profit. I speak as one who recognizes that faith without justice is empty ritual, that prayer without action is merely noise, that a church that claims universal love while accepting structural violence is living a contradiction that undermines its very foundation. To my fellow African leaders, I say this: we must stop using religion as a tool for controlling our people while we ourselves bow before foreign powers. Our continent's spiritual wealth is not a resource to be exploited, but a wellspring of wisdom that can guide us toward true liberation. To religious leaders across Africa, I say your calling is higher than comfort. Your responsibility is greater than maintaining institutions. Your loyalty must be to truth first, not to hierarchies that have often betrayed our continent while blessing us with empty words. And to Pope Francis directly, I extend both challenge and invitation. Come to Africa not as a patron visiting clients, but as a brother seeking wisdom. Listen to our theologians not with the ear of authority evaluating orthodoxy, but with the heart of a fellow seeker after truth. See our struggles not through the lens of charity that maintains distance between giver and receiver, but through the perspective of justice that recognizes our right to dignity, sovereignty, and self-determination. The future of Christianity lies not in Rome, but in places like Ouagadougou, Kinshasa, Nairobi, and Lagos. Not because we have rejected the faith brought by missionaries, but because we have transformed it through the fire of our experience, purifying it of imperial corruption and reconnecting it to its radical roots. Africa does not need a faith imported and controlled from elsewhere. Africa needs a faith that springs from our own soil, speaks through our own voices, and addresses our own realities. This is not rejection. This is resurrection. It is time for Rome to recognize that its salvation may well come from the very continent it once viewed only as a mission field, that the renewal of a church growing old and tired in Europe may spring from the vibrant, resilient faith of Africans who believe despite suffering, who praise despite poverty, who hope despite centuries of betrayal. Brothers and sisters, our faith is not for sale. Our spirituality is not negotiable. Our dignity is not optional. Let this message reach the Vatican not as threat, but as prophecy, not as rejection, but as invitation to transformation, not as breaking faith, but as keeping it, with the gospel's truest meaning and with the ancestors whose blood and tears baptized this soil long before cathedrals rose in our capitals. Africa's time has come, not just politically or economically, but spiritually. The question is whether Rome will recognize this divine timing or remain trapped in structures of thought and power that belong to a passing age. The choice belongs not just to the Pope, but to all of us who seek a faith that liberates rather than subjugates, that transforms rather than conforms, that speaks truth to power rather than blessing power's abuses. May God give us all, from the humblest village church to the grandeur of St. Peter's, the courage to choose rightly. Thank you.